Hi and good afternoon. Today I'm going to talk about global and local trends in emerging technologies. I have decided to record this presentation just in case our webinar doesn't work and also to have a record for later on and for those people who can't make it this afternoon. I'm going to focus on three readings that I've shared with you beforehand. It's the reading the Horizon Report, the 2017, the most current Horizon Report for higher education. Then there's a South African overview over the last 20 years on educational technologies in higher education that we wrote with a group of researchers and academics here around Cape Town. And then the third document is an edited book that was coordinated by Wendy Kinfor from the University of Pretoria on various issues around the use of technology in teaching and learning. And I'm just going to briefly talk about each of these documents. I hope you'll find time to read them, or at least read the parts that you find interesting. Yes, I will just give you a short summary, maybe highlight the most important things for me from these reports so that we can have a little bit of a basis for discussion and conversation that hopefully will continue this afternoon and even over the next few days. So the first document that I'd like to talk about is the NMC, the New Media Consortium Horizon Report 2017. The Horizon Report comes out every year, at the beginning of every year. What it is, it's a survey among a group of stakeholders, decision makers in higher education on what they think the most important technological innovations or trends are. So it's not a quantitative survey. It's a small group of people. They call it the Duffy technique. So you interview experts. So they try to identify experts across the globe who are doing research and who are involved in decision making, policy making around educational technology and higher education, to ask them for their opinions. As I said, it comes out every year and it gives you an overview about what they believe, these experts believe, will be the short-term, mid-term, and long-term tools or technology that would drive technology adoption in higher education. Every year this changes quite dramatically. I'll talk about this later on, but it's an interesting snapshot of where we are. It has some issues, and I'm going to talk about this later on as well, but it just gives you an idea of what people talk about, what's already nearly mainstream in higher education around the world, what's being thought of, where people plan. And it's really a tool for decision makers, policy advocates to see where they should put their resources or efforts in. So for this year in 2017, the key trends short term, which basically mean mainstream adoption this year or next year by the end of 2018, is really interesting for us, blended learning designs and collaborative learning. Midterm, they talk about measuring learning, learning analytics, and redesigning learning spaces. And then long term, they talk about advancing cultures of innovation. So this idea that the university should be the hub to develop innovation, entrepreneurship, creativity. We'll talk about this a bit later. And also deeper learning approaches, by which they mean more authentic learning, more learning that's closer to the real world, complex problems that require creative solutions, multidisciplinary approaches, multiple viewpoints. They don't have one solution, but where students are encouraged to think out of the box in teams, reflect on what they have been doing, as close to the real world as possible to address real world problems and to also prepare our students better for the real world, the world of learning. What's, as I said, really interesting for us is that blended learning designs is so prominent, looks like at least, this year, and I've cut out the actual paragraph because I thought because we are doing a blended learning design course, this might be of interest to us. So again, this is about blended learning as they define it is to combine face-to-face and online learning. So to take the best of both worlds, to do face-to-face what's best done face-to-face, and to do online what's best done online. So as I said, drawing from best practices in both online and face-to-face method, blended learning is on the rise at colleges and universities as the number of digital learning platforms and ways to leverage them for educational purposes continue to expand. The affordances of blended learning are now well understood, and its flexibilities and access and the integration of sophisticated multimedia technologies are high among the list of appeals. So there's this idea that it's not new anymore, it's not a new innovative technology, it's something that we know about, we've done research about, we've trained people, so it's become mainstream in these institutions at least. And what's also interesting is the focus is now more on how these application of digital modes of teaching are impacting on students. And many findings showcase an increase in creative thinking, independent study, the ability for the students to tailor learning experiences to meet their individual needs. So this idea of more personal, adaptive learning, where students can find their learning path through a curriculum. And what's also really, I think, interesting for us, so it's not something that we have an alternative to either adopt or not. What they say is that online, mobile, and blended learning are foregone conclusions. So if institutions do not already have robust strategies for integrating these now pervasive approaches, then they will simply not survive. So it's actually not a choice anymore. It's something that we should really look into and work with. You can see that for the first time, they have also looked at key trends. So over the last 5 years, how have these trends changed or shifted or come up and then gone again and come up again? You can see blended learning designs have been consistent over the last 5 years. The focus on measuring learning, so learning analytics, the use of big data to predict student success, to help students before they fail. So this idea to use data from the learning management system, but also from other sources, to automatically see who of the students are struggling and to preventively engage with them and see whether they need additional help has also been around for a while. Cultures of innovation have been around for the last 3 years, redesigning learning spaces. So this whole idea that learning is starting to change rather than having the lecture approach with one person in front talking to many students sitting on fixed benches is changing as we move towards a more active, collaborative, authentic learning experience. The learning spaces have to change, have to become more flexible, smaller, allowing for group collaboration, the use of multiple devices. People need to be able to bring their own devices, their own computers, laptops. They need charging stations maybe all over. They need Wi-Fi, things like that. The deeper learning approaches have been around a while ago in 2012 and are coming back now. Also collaborative learning has been around, coming back. And you can see those were the trends for this year, but there are others that have been on and off over the last few years that are as important, I would say. Then on top of the technological trends, they also talk about the most significant challenges that would impede on higher education technology adoption. And again, they categorize them into solvable, difficult, and wicked problems. So the solvable problems that have been around for a long time and that people seem to be able to address now is the idea of improving digital literacies. So among staff, but also students. So this idea that we have to be fluent it's not only about having certain skills, knowing how to use certain tools, but it's about being immersed in a digital world and knowing how to navigate your way through it. So knowing how to learn about new skills if needed, knowing where and how to use certain tools, knowing about digital literacies also include things like, knowing how to use certain tools in terms of privacy, about the risks involved, like bullying. So it's much more than just knowing how to use a laptop. It's really being immersed, being part of this digital world, having an identity in this digital world and being able to navigate this digital world successfully. Integrating formal and informal learning, so that speaks to the idea that the most important thing for us is to look at as learning as lifelong learning, and the university as well as facilitating this idea of lifelong learning. So everything that you are doing at university should feed into whatever you want to do afterwards and be part of what you do afterwards. So also recognition of prior learning becomes important, badges. So this idea that you can accumulate badges and create your own degree, the access to MOOCs and alternative ways of acquiring degrees become more and more important to give people flexibility, especially those who work, so they want to study part-time. So all of these are challenges that, at least based on this report, we have solved, or we will be solving very soon. We've done our research, we know how to solve them. The ones that are more difficult to solve, talk a little bit, and maybe that's the only part where I find this report becomes a little bit more nuanced or more political. It's the achievement gap, that there are still certain factors, certain people who are much more likely to succeed than others. It's very closely linked to this idea of digital equity, so digital divide. How do we make sure that everyone has access to all those resources and opportunities that are out there, and to understand that not everyone has equal access, and to have nuanced or more flexible ways of supporting students. The ones that are wicked, where we don't know yet, they're even too complex to define, much less address, the knowledge obsolescence, difficult word. So it's this idea that knowledge becomes obsolete so quickly. We have to constantly update our knowledge. What do we do with the old knowledge that's not valid anymore? How do we keep track of how knowledge has evolved? What's new and innovative? So that's a problem that we are not yet that we haven't yet defined. The rethinking the roles of educators, I think for me that's interesting that I find that they define it as wicked, because I think so this idea that teachers or lecturers have become more facilitators of learning has been around for a long time, and I think there are ways of addressing that issue. And again, this year they've given us an overview over the last few years, so the kind of challenges that have been there for a long time, the competition from new models of education. I think that speaks now to the integration of formal and informal learning, which people seem to have fixed. So it's this idea that there's a lot more private education, privately offered education, higher education, that there are all these MOOCs and things out there that there's distance education, online education that allows people from all over the world to take part. So those are all serious challenges to local models of higher education. The blending of formal and informal learning is a challenge that's been around for about 3 years. The digital literacies have been around for a few years. Interesting that, for example, integrating technology in faculty education is a challenge that's gone away. So clearly the staff development around use of technologies was successful. Personalized adaptive learning has been around for a while, keeping education relevant, rewarding teaching. So you can see what's been on the horizon for the last few years. And the third part of these reports is always the developments in technology for higher education. So what is it that kind of drives whatever technology innovation we are seeing? And so you can see the short-term drivers are the adaptive learning technologies. So this idea of intelligent learning management systems, which allow a lot more flexibility and adaptive learning for individual students, so that the learning can be actually adapted to the individual students' needs. So it's not one size for all like it is currently, but that students have the chance to find their own individual learning path through a specific model. And the mobile learning platforms that also allow a lot of innovation. 2 to 3 years, the developments in technology focus around the Internet of Things. So the idea that everything is connected through all objects are data capturing and are capturing information about ourselves, whether it's your fridge or your phone or the Google glasses you're wearing. So this whole idea of your watch that now constantly measures your exercise and your activities. So it's this idea that we're part of something that's constantly measuring us. That there's anything we do produces data that's being measured, that's being captured, and that's being used to make our life easier. The next generation LMS, I've spoken quickly about it. So it's this idea of having something that's more flexible than the current platforms we have, that allows more integration of different tools, more flexibility, and in particular more flexibility to the learner. And 4 to 5 years, there's artificial intelligence that people talk a lot about, and natural user interfaces. Again, you can see the overview of the trends and the drivers that have been around for a while and the ones that have come up recently. But the New Horizon report has also been critiqued, although it comes out every year, and it's one of those reports that everybody at least in my field, has to read every year, and everybody's waiting, for the New Horizon report to come up. There are people who critique it, and although they have become a little bit bitter, there was always this lack of historical overview. So every year you could see these new tools coming up, and often you were wondering, but this was like, where is the historical flow? What was important last year? How come it looks completely different this year? So there were these weird gaps, and it wasn't very, there was no sense of things developing somewhere, which has changed a little bit. But there's always this feeling that the predictions are quite haphazard. So what's on this year might be off next year, and you never know why. But in particular, you wonder, what happened to the technologies that fall off the horizon, that suddenly they aren't there anymore? Were they rejected? Have they been adopted? Are they not an issue anymore? So there's this lack of continuity. And there's also, it's not a very critical report. It's very much written from one standpoint, as Audrey Waters, who is one of my really heroes in this field, would say. And it's quite a neoliberal, very consumer-oriented, very global outlook that doesn't really take into consideration the political context. There's nothing around the issues around neoliberalism, the funding crisis, questions around academic freedom that come up all over the world, whether it's in Turkey or in the US. So those kind of things are never there. So the political aspect is, if at all, inherently present in some of the challenges, but it's never forefronted. So what I think is really important is to also look then locally what's happening on the ground, because sometimes when you read these Horizon reports and then you compare that to your own institution or your own context, it can be quite frustrating and depressing, because we are nowhere where these Horizon reports tell us we should be. So sometimes I find they're not as helpful maybe as they could be. So what we have done a few years ago is to look at to use a project that we were involved in, which looked at emerging technologies, or the use of emerging technologies in higher education across South Africa. And from there, use the people we were working with and the kind of experience we've gathered to write a paper on the last 20 years of technology adoption in South Africa. There was a paper that Laura Chenowitz and Cheryl Brown wrote in 2005, which kind of gave a first overview, and anybody who's ever been writing in this field had to reference this article because it was really a very nice article. But it was written in 2005, so for the last 10 years there hasn't been anything similar, so we thought there's a gap there, and let's look at it, look what has happened since. And what we have done in this paper is to kind of categorize the last 20 years in 4 broad phases. And the first phase we found happened from 1996 to 2000, so these phases all cover 5 years each. And we called it the computer-assisted instruction phase. So during that time, I don't know if you were around, but technology was seen very much as a productivity tool, as doing things more effectively, and it was very much focused on computer-based, computer-assisted instruction, so the typical drill and practice exercise is very behavioralistic, and it was mostly focused on computer labs. People didn't yet have, each lecture didn't yet have computer, and students even less. So it was very localized. It was points where you could access computers, and it was used. There wasn't much internet or the World Wide Web use yet, but what you used it for is those kind of language exercises, activities. And the kind of questions that were asked at that time were around the digital divide, but it was very much access. So access to computers, that was seen as the digital divide. So the questions were, how could we get more computers? Where could we get funding for more computers so more students could use these? Then the second phase from 2001 to 2005, we called it the democratization of knowledge and development of strategies. So it's about more and more computers were available at the universities. There were big funding initiatives where there were external or internal computer labs were set up. More and more lecturers got their own computers. More and more students had their own computers. So it was very much about building the ICT infrastructure to support a mainstreaming of computers, a rollout, and the focus was less on efficiency and more on how can we use computers for teaching and learning? How can we use this? How can we benefit from this to improve our learning? The third phase then, from 2006 to 2010, ICT has become an integral part of institutional strategies and policies. Most universities by then had central support units that would support lectures in using teaching and learning, computers in teaching and learning. The digital divide debate was broadened, so it wasn't just about access, physical access, but it was also about how would you use the computer when you have it. So it has become a lot more nuanced. And during that time, there's a lot of research that happened, scholarship that evolved around the use of using ICTs in teaching and learning. And then the last phase, 2011 till 2016. So while the previous phases were all very much focused on institutionalizing ICTs, over the last few years, suddenly this thing has been disrupted a little bit with the outcome of social media and all the technologies that the students now bring into the teaching and learning space. So this idea that the social and academic is starting to blur, and that people are using technology across boundaries and as boundaries and crossing boundaries between the social and the academic, and how can we use all these skills and the literacies that they're acquiring, the tools that they have for the social life in the academic life, and all the problems that come with it. And what's really interesting is that when we wrote that paper, it wasn't that evident, but I think in hindsight, the disruption through the fees must fall also meant that suddenly there was a huge push into blended learning, which maybe not for the right reasons, but what we could see is there was a huge increase in demand and interest in online assessment, in blending learning, just to be able to be more, to react more flexibly, to adapt more, to adapt better to any change in the teaching situation. So that was very briefly our paper, and then the last report I want to talk about is this book that we wrote, or an edited collection that we wrote with colleagues from all over South Africa who are involved in this kind of project, and it's called Moving Beyond the Hype, a contextual view of learning with technology in higher education. It was edited by Wendy Kinfor and has a lot of different topics that at that time, that was written in 2015, people thought were interesting, and I don't want to touch all of them. If you're interested in any of these, please have a look. What I want to look mainly at is the blended learning, again the blended learning chapter, because that's the one that we are most interested in. So each of these short chapters are set up in a similar way. So it starts with recommendation on whatever tool or technology they are focusing on, then they define it, they talk about current trends internationally, the affordances of tools, and then some of the issues locally. So how are these tools and technologies applied in different contexts in South Africa? So it's a really nice short overview over these different issues in the use of technology in higher education. The blended learning was written by a number of colleagues. Our colleague Dr. Ivala, Professor Ivala, was part of it. And these authors argue that, when you talk about blended learning, what's really important is to think about infrastructure and the ecosystem. So what's out there, what can be supported, what can students expect to be able to access, to be able to use whatever blended learning you are introducing. It's not something that works immediately well. It's something you have to think about. It has to integrate into your ecosystem of teaching and learning, so it has to be integrated in whatever your current practices already are. There's need for a lot of professional development around blended learning, so it's not always easy to design the right mix, what blend will work, what is best done face-to-face or online. So there need to be a lot of conversations with lecturers. What could work? What could you do? And also, what would students like to see? What are they able to, how are they able to participate in these blends? And what's really important, they argue there are two essential facilitation skills for lecturers who want to get involved in blending. One is around online facilitation. So it's different to support lecturers or to support students online. There's a different way of producing or creating a social presence that sense that you're part of a community, that somebody is there to care for you. So there's a certain code of conduct that people need to negotiate with their students around how to behave online, how to engage with each other, how to show respect, what are the challenges, how can you maybe come across differently while you're writing in a discussion forum than face-to-face, and all those things, including privacy and copyright and stuff. But also, and it's really interesting, establishing boundaries. So what we often speak with lecturers about is, say, when they use WhatsApp, what kind of boundaries will you set? Do you want students to maybe only engage with you between 8 and 8, and then from 8 that's your private time? So it's a very individual thing, and every lecturer negotiates those boundaries differently, but you have to negotiate them. So some lecturers say they don't care, they actually prefer to reply to students' posts, after 10 when everybody else is asleep, and some others are very concerned about their privacy. So it's an individual thing that needs to be negotiated and expressed so that students know what they can expect. yeah, the creation of social presence online is a big issue, and one needs to think about that. How would one do that? How can you, especially if you through blended learning, you might see your students less. How can you keep in touch, or you can keep in contact? How can the students still feel you care for them online? And then this idea of affordances of tools and technologies. So what is fit for purpose? So which tools and technologies would be best used in your context, in your situation? So for me, for example, today what I'm doing, I'm recording this, I'm preparing this just in case the webinar might not work, because we always know our bandwidth is always an issue. It might work when we're all at home. We've had some very successful webinars from outside the institution, but within CPUT it's always a hit and miss. So for me, recording this ahead, sending you the link on YouTube, so for anybody to be able to watch this on their own, and then maybe start a conversation either on the Blackboard Collaborate Room or through WhatsApp. We'll have to see whatever fits our purpose most. These are just some examples they bring of blended learning. As I said, for a lot of people last year, a big question was, how can I still assist students even if they can't come to campus? How can I create online exams? How would that look like? Would that be like a take-home exam then? Could I still time it? How would I make sure I know who wrote the exam? You know, how do I have to redefine or reframe the questions so they are personal enough that students can't just copy paste from a textbook? So there's a lot of thinking that has to go through in such a blend, especially if it concerns assessment. I think the easier way is to just give access to external resources, open educational resources, MOOCs, everything that's out there already available, and to guide students through the engagement with this contents, maybe with some questions that you ask. That's the idea of the flipped classroom, so they engage with the content outside the class, and then inside the class. In the class time, you have more time for discussion and group work and problem solving, the more interactive stuff. And I think the most obvious is to use this for communication and announcements, to stay in touch. But also what people have started to do, especially with large classes, is to introduce some sort of online mentoring, tutoring. So you meet your students in a chat room or via WhatsApp or through email. You try and support people beyond the classroom in different ways. There's some people, Yolanda, who you've met last week online, is doing all her crit sessions online using Skype. So people are starting to think about how to engage with students beyond the classroom time. So this was really a very brief overview of these 3 papers. I'm hoping it will lead to an interesting conversation. These are the references. And yes, I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon. Bye.